made and a promise kept. That signing moved around a lot, too, Dana. We initially thought that it was going to be when Congress came back the second week of January. Then we thought he was going to do it in West Palm Beach next week because the review was going to take some time, and then have an event when he came back. But then he decided, you know what? I want to get this done before I leave, so we signed it this morning. The president saying that this is going to supercharge the U.S. economy and help middle-class taxpayers. Listen here.
I consider this very much a bill for the middle class and a bill for jobs. And jobs are produced through companies and corporations, and you see that happening. Corporations are literally going wild over this. I think even beyond my expectations, so far beyond my expectations.
You know, a number of corporations, what the president is talking about there, and I think the number is now up to 7, have announced either bonuses or hikes in wages or even more charitable donations as a result of tax reform kicking in. And the president said, you know, this has just happened in the past 48 hours. Let's wait a few months and see what happens. So that's one of the reasons why the president is getting that big welcome there in Palm Beach. A lot of people congratulating him on the passage of tax reform. But, of course, it's an area of Florida, because I've spent a lot of time down there with the president, where he is very, very popular. So I'm sure that he'll spend at least the next 20 minutes or so signing autographs, hats, and whatever, Dana. A very, very big day for the president, though, and a very Merry Christmas for his administration.
And yet there's no rest for the weary. They're already looking ahead to next year. And I was curious if you know more about what happened at the political meeting that took place at the White House earlier this week.
It was on Wednesday. It was right after the president had that big ceremony at the South Portico announcing the passage of tax reform. He huddled with some of his closest advisors and some folks from the outside. Let's put them up on the screen so you know. Chief of Staff John Kelly, Kellyanne Conway, Hope Hicks, his communications director, Bill Stepien, who is his political director, Corey Lewandowski, who everybody knows is his former campaign manager, and Brad Parscale, who is his digital director during the campaign. We're told that that meeting became quite heated when Corey Lewandowski stepped forward and suggested that the president was not being well served by the political operation here at the White House. The president had met the day before with Reince Priebus, his former chief of staff and the former head of the RNC, who said very much the same thing. I'm also told that Lewandowski was very critical of the Republican National Committee as well, thinking that even though they've raised record amounts of money, that they need to do more. And sources here at the White House also say, you know, that there is a disconnect in the RNC between what's going on here at the White House and what the RNC is doing. It's almost kind of like two separate entities, as opposed to the RNC being the political arm of the White House. The communication shops are not in sync enough. And I was also told by an outside source that the RNC is in such bad shape, it needs to be torn down to the foundation and rebuilt all over again. Though nobody's taking aim at Ronna McDaniel. They're just saying it's the rest of the infrastructure that's been in there. It really is kind of rotting from the inside and needs to have a big overhaul. So we'll see what happens in early 2018 on that front.
We certainly will. All right, John Roberts, have a great holiday, much deserved, and we'll see you in the new year.
Appreciate it.
All right, let's bring in Chris Darwalt, our Fox News politics editor. So let's continue to talk about that meeting that happened at the White House where they're talking about politics, because while they wanted to celebrate the big tax reform effort, they really do have to start planning ahead, because all indications right now are that the Democrats are doing very well, at least in the generic ballot. But now at least the president gets to go home on a high note, having just signed tax reform before he left.
Well, there's a fundamental disagreement here. We have sort of what's been described, I think rightly, as a coalition government between sort of the Republican Party and the Trump populists. The two of them put things together before the Republican convention in 2016, went on for the most shocking political upset of my lifetime. And we've watched as they've tried to govern together with hits and misses, right? You had a very rough beginning of the year. It was tough sledding for the Trump White House as they struggled with even basic stuff. But at the same time, how do you keep contact with the energy that propelled Trump into office if you are selling out, quote unquote, selling out in favor of the Republican establishment, even though it is that Republican establishment that delivered the win? The two biggest wins of Trump's year, the Gorsuch nomination to the Supreme Court and this tax cut, are both the work substantially of these establishment figures like Mitch McConnell and Paul Ryan. So how do you fuse those two things? And that tension is real inside inside the administration, and it's real as they think about how to approach the 2018 midterms.
So it might have given them a little heartburn when President Trump has been praising and singling out Paul Ryan and Mitch McConnell in particular and thanking them for their help. Does that give maybe more of the populist side of the equation heartburn?
Well, especially after Steve Bannon stunk up the joint in Alabama with the Roy Moore nomination, pushing that against the wishes of the president. So the populists are not in very good odor right now. The people who are the total war populists, always against their own Republican Party. But look at it this way: when we get into January, when we come back, the conflict is set. Does the president? We have Republicans like Rand Paul and others, including Paul Ryan, saying that it's time to cut spending, having just engendered a lot of deficit spending for the years to come. Now it's time to cut spending and look at entitlements, look at welfare, look at those things. And then on the other side, you have the Trump White House say, no, actually, we're going to talk about spending borrowing and spending another $1 trillion, but this time for infrastructure, and it's time to deal with the Democrats. So these divisions and the question about does the administration now want to pivot and reach left, or are they going to consolidate and try to keep this coalition together between the Republican establishment and these folks? The choices made in January and February are going to determine what the midterms look like as it relates to those questions.
From what you know down in Washington, if you had a chance to hear John Roberts just before you, is the criticism that he's hearing about the RNC actually warranted?
No. I mean, I'll put it this way. Parties are done. The political parties, the RNC, the DNC, are defeated. They are not what they once were. And that's the fault of the McCain-Feingold campaign finance reform legislation that was then compounded by the Citizens United decision that let everybody spend anything they wanted all the time. All of those things compile to make meaningless political parties as central institutions. And anybody who is saying, well, the party needs to be torn down and built back, I can only guess who they think ought to be in charge of tearing it down and building it back up. It's probably they themselves.
Right.
So I would say this is a bunch of most likely a bunch of flummery and score settling and positioning so that people can get the sweetest plums from the bottom of the figgy pudding.
Well, and especially if the parties are not what they once were, there's a lot of money to be made in the consulting part of this.
The scrape on this sucker, it's like all of the crumbs from all of the beautiful slices of cake that have been cut, and there are plenty of people around in this town who make fantastic livings just by sweeping those little crummies into a basket.
Well, we appreciate you being on and being a part of the daily briefing, and that you wore a bow tie for this appearance. We really appreciate that.
I figure our last appearance together of this year, I can nerd out a little bit because you create that safe space for me.
Indeed. All right, Chris Stirewalt, Merry Christmas. We'll see you in the new year. Thanks so much. So more than 100 million Americans expected to head out today for their holiday destinations. But winter weather could make things tough in parts of the country on one of the busiest travel days of the year. Several states expecting snow, sleet, or rain as a storm system moves through. Let's get right over to Chief Meteorologist Rick Reitmuth. Rick, I hate the wintry mix. It's the worst.
That's one of my favorite things anybody has ever said in a toss to me.
Is there going to be some wintry mix?
There is going to be a wintry mix, and there's going to be a big ice storm across parts of New England tomorrow. So actually, we've got about 4 really bad travel days across the Northeast. This warm air you see down here across the Southeast, that's all on its way towards the Northeast. So a big warm up is going to happen, and you think, well, that is nice, but it's going to cause some real problems in the way. So we've got one storm right now. It's bringing the snow to the Northeast. The tail end of it down here across parts of the Central Plains is bringing a lot of rain, and on the backside of it, it's a lot colder. So we're seeing some of that wintry mix and some snow across parts of Oklahoma. Be careful on those roads this afternoon. But by the time we move into tonight, overall airports, by the way, not looking that bad, which is great news for us. The roads, though, across the Northeast are going to be a problem. And this takes us through tonight into tomorrow, and you get the idea. A lot of people on the eastern half of the country getting a lot of rain, and behind this, we start to see the colder air come in. Here's how this plays across the Northeast. We have snow today. Tomorrow, we start to see freezing rain, and it's going to be pretty extensive. Some spots well over 1/4 of an inch of freezing rain that's going to down a lot of trees and power lines and is going to fall on top of the snow. So that's going to create an ice layer on top of the snow. Then we see a little bit of rain move in for probably about 5 or 6 hours, and then snow moves back in on the backside of it. It's a very complicated system. You see the snow first, then you see all this pink. That's all icing that's going to happen. And then Sunday into Monday, we have a coastal storm that we're going to watch as well across parts of the Northeast. So overall, I will tell you, Dana, we had an amazing Thanksgiving travel time. Not the case, at least on the eastern half of the country. Today, not good. Tomorrow, not good. Christmas Eve, not that
Best
great.
guess for who's going to have the best white Christmas?
So that storm, interior sections of New England are going to have probably that storybook Christmas with the
Excellent.
snow falling and accumulating. It will be a beauty. But the process of getting there, you better have all of your
Well, hopefully people
travel
will get
and
home
packing,
safe.
Yeah, and
all right.
shopping done.
And Merry Christmas to you.
Same
Thank
to
you so
Dana.
much.
You bet.
So new details about Congress paying out claims for misconduct. So how much taxpayer money has been spent on settlements for sexual harassment and other alleged offenses? Plus the UN taking new steps to try to stop North Korea's nuclear ambitions. Watch.
Imagine being a North Korean soldier, so desperate and so ravaged by hunger and disease that you would take 5 bullets from your fellow soldiers in order to escape across the DMZ.
New data out shows just how much money has been spent settling workplace misconduct claims against members of Congress. Over the last 20 years, just under $600,000 has been paid out to settle claims against senators. Of that, none was for sexual harassment. And there was one claim for about $14,000 for sexual discrimination. And then in the House, there have been about $199,000 taxpayer dollars paid to settle sexual harassment claims dating back to 2008. So let's bring in Gianno Caldwell, founder of Caldwell Strategic Consulting, and radio talk show host Richard Fowler. Both are Fox News contributors and familiar with Washington, D.C. So, Gianno, this isn't a tremendous sum, but from all accounts, it seems like it's kind of a big problem.
I mean, it's definitely a very big problem. What's even more problematic is the fact that some employees don't have the ability to file complaints. I'll give you an example. A friend of mine recently alleged that a congressman sexually harassed her, and she wasn't able to file a complaint because she was a Congressional Black Caucus fellow. So that allowed for her to be further disenfranchised and not be able to have protections that employees normally have. So that's something that has to be cleaned up. Further, when we look at the data and we see that some of these very big claims that were paid out, I believe it was one that appears that it was for over $400,000 for racial discrimination, if I was reading that correctly. I mean, we would love to know who that individual was. That sounds like it was a very serious situation. And lastly, there could be scenarios that play out, and I'm not saying that I have the data to support it at this time, but maybe they're, a congressman or whoever who may have a big campaign fund and they decide to settle those allegations with those kind of funds. Like, those need to be combed through as well. We just don't know what the possibilities are because this is a new world that's being revealed to a lot of us.
Richard, do you think that there is room for Republicans and Democrats to work together on this? There's some changes that are coming. They're going to try to get back to it right after the new year. And it seems to me, by all accounts I've seen, is that they realize, wow, we've got a problem here. We need to fix it.
I think there is an opportunity for Democrats and Republicans to work together on this, but I think it's going to require that both parties stop the search for a moral high ground. I think you have Kristen Gillibrand on the left looking for a moral high ground. I think you have members of the right looking for a moral high ground. But let's be real, Dana. There is no moral high ground because on both sides of the aisle, whether it's the Democrats or the Republicans, there's misogyny, there's racism, there's homophobia. They exist on both sides. So this ideal of this high ground is a mirage. And so we've got to stop looking for the moral high ground and come together and figure out how we actually solve the Me Too campaign. How do we come to a real solution? The real solution is 1, education, 2, transparency, 3, accountability, but most importantly, it's education. And that means it's beyond the naming and shaming. It's how we educate young men and boys. And I think that has to start immediately.
And also for women to know their rights and that they can speak up for themselves. And I know that many members of Congress have talked about that as well. Gianno, one question for you is, we had heard that there were reporters that were looking into possibly, up to 40 members of Congress who had been accused of sexual harassment. That really hasn't come to fruition, but do you expect to hear more of this in the future?
I mean, this is certainly going to be a continued conversation, not just in Congress or in the media or anybody that's really high profile. I was in Amsterdam recently, and I was talking with some executives. I had dinner with some executives, and I said, how are you guys dealing with this sexual harassment? And it was interesting what they said to me, I was actually pretty blown away that they told me that executives in their industries and others said that they were not going to hire women unless they had to, because they didn't understand what the standards truly were. If something happened 10 years ago and maybe they were in a room with a woman alone, they don't know how to act. And I'm like, wow, are you serious? So definitely, to Richard's point, there's a need for training. There's a need for a number of different things for everyone to know what their rights are and what the standards are.
Everybody to know what the rules are. And what a foolhardy thing to say, that they wouldn't want to hire women.
That's what. But
I mean, that's going to hurt their bottom line.
It's important for me to mention what people are saying, because so many people are afraid of
I agree.
what could
Last word to
possibly
Richard,
happen.
and then we'll get out of here.
I think Giano brings up a very, very interesting point that is not being talked about in the media, but that is exactly what happens when a pendulum moves that quickly, is when it moves that quickly and it's moved by elites, those who are the most vulnerable, right? So women who are doing their best work in places like Nebraska, in places like, you know, Arkansas, they're the ones who are the most vulnerable, who men don't want to hire them because, like, I don't want to get caught up in this Me Too campaign. And I think I'm happy that Giano said it, because that's what's missing in this narrative.
States.
Well,
it's definitely all 50 states.
Absolutely.
All right.
Yeah.
Well,
absolutely.
Giano and Richard, I wish you both a very Merry Christmas, and I'll see you in the new year. Thanks so much.
Merry Christmas.
Okay. Astonishing new numbers about deaths from drug overdoses as the opioid crisis keeps getting worse. Our next guest says it's worse than the AIDS epidemic, and we'll explain why. The nation's deadly opioid epidemic is so bad that it's dragging down our average life expectancy, which has dropped 2 years in a row. Latest statistics from the Federal Centers for Disease Control show more than 63,000 overdose deaths last year, 42,000 of them opiate-related. That tops the number of deaths at the height of the AIDS epidemic. Keith Humphreys is a professor of psychiatry and behavioral sciences at Stanford University with a focus on addictive behavior and drug policy. I heard you say, Keith, that you don't even think these numbers have peaked yet.
Unfortunately, no, they haven't. You know, we see this huge rise in the raw numbers, but also if you look at the rate of increase, it's still going up. Fentanyl illustrates that the best. It took from the invention of fentanyl till 2 years ago to get to 10,000 deaths. We added 10,000 more deaths in the last 12 months. So this is far from the worst of it.
Based on your expertise, what is it about the addictive properties of the opiates that it changes your brain chemistry, and it's difficult to ever get off of it? And then fentanyl, in particular, coming across the border, we know that, and also illegally coming in from other places, not just across the border, but coming into the country. Is there any way that you can see right now that you could change the behavior? I mean, that's what you're an expert in that. And I'm curious if you think that's possible. I know that some of these states and localities want to sue the pharmaceutical companies. I don't know what you get from that.
Yeah, so there's more than one problem here. The first is, how do you stop creating new people who are addicted to opioids? And that requires a change in medicine, which is starting to happen but needs to go faster. We need to stop putting people on these medications when they don't need them. There's no reason for a 14-year-old kid, for example, who had an uncomplicated wisdom tooth extraction to walk out of a dentist's office with 30 Vicodin and a promise for a refill, and yet that still happens. So on the preventive side, we need to stop creating new addicted people. Then with those who are addicted, we need to give them high-quality services, give them treatment that will get them out of this very difficult situation they're in, which is harmful to them, but also is very difficult for their families and for the communities in which they live.
What do you think about the lawsuits that the cities and counties are there's about 5 or 6, I guess, that are starting to go to court to try to, I guess, get more funding and punish and maybe change behavior? But then are there effective treatments that can help people that are addicted?
Yeah, so I think one way to understand the lawsuits, which are coming from all over the country, cities, states, and counties, is frustration with the political process. In other words, I think a lot of people feel their elected legislators haven't protected them, and the last recourse they have is lawsuits against either the manufacturers or against the distributors. And there have been some, exposures of pretty egregious conduct. Where I'm from, West Virginia, for example, there was a distributor shipping millions of pills to a town with 400 people in it. So there is a lot of misconduct there, and I think that will come out in these various court cases.
Do you think we know that the White House is very focused on this? They've talked about the opiate addiction a lot. Do you think there's any specific thing that they could do that would help the situation?
Yeah, the president has laid the table very well. I mean, he's made important announcements. He gave a great speech. He appointed a commission of very smart people who gave him a lot of good advice. But now's the time for action. In other words, the commission gave good advice on expanding treatment, on using law enforcement differently, on taking action against fentanyl. But now it's time for him and the Congress as well to put it into action. They haven't done that yet, and I very much hope they will. People around the country hope that they will, because we're losing 175 people a day, so we really need to go quickly on this.
It's the people, it's what their families go through, and also we see here that the government estimates that the health care costs and poor job performance is costing Americans $78 billion a year. That's according to the CDC. So obviously we all need to do more. Keith Humphreys, thanks so much for being here today.
Thank you.
A day after some harsh threats over Jerusalem, Ambassador Nikki Haley back at the United Nations talking sanctions against North Korea. We'll tell you what this crackdown includes. Plus, tens of millions of Americans heading out for what's expected to be a record-breaking travel season. Adam Housley had a bird's-eye view of some travelers. Adam.
Yeah, 107 million Americans. That's a record behind me. It's already started in L.A., although traffic's always bad here. It's only going to get worse. This will be a record holiday season. We'll have all the numbers and even a look around the country coming up.
This is a Fox News alert. The UN Security Council has unanimously passed a new resolution at this hour that would ban nearly 90% of all oil exports to North Korea. These new sanctions are the latest attempt to push back against the rogue regime's nuclear threats. And David Lee Miller is at the United Nations. So why this resolution today?
Dana, this latest resolution is in direct response to North Korea launching an intercontinental ballistic missile on November 29th. This was a missile that the experts say had the capability to hit anywhere in the continental United States. Now, the resolution today is the 10th since 2006 addressing North Korea, the 4th resolution this year. It effectively will tighten the noose around the regime, restricting oil imports and exports and a host of other products. It also demands the repatriation of North Korean workers who provide Pyongyang with about $500 million a year. This resolution was sponsored by the U.S. The U.S. UN ambassador thanked North Korea's closest ally, China, for supporting the resolution. And Nikki Haley also had some very harsh words for the regime in Pyongyang.
The Kim regime continues to defy the resolutions of this council, the norms of civilized behavior, and the patience of the international community. Their arrogance and hostility to anything productive has set their country on a destructive path.
Nikki Haley concluded her remarks saying, and I quote now, that this was the most modern example of evil in the modern world. Dana?
All right, David, thank you so much. Meanwhile, Palestinian President Mahmoud Abbas responding after Nikki Haley's vehement defense yesterday of President Trump's decision to recognize Jerusalem as Israel's capital. Abbas saying America has lost or distanced itself from the political process, but there are many other important countries in the world supporting us that can play a role in achieving peace in the Middle East. Fox and Friends co-host Brian Kilmeade joining me now. I'm glad that you did. Let me also show you this picture, Brian, of an invitation that Nikki Haley sent out to countries that voted no, abstained, or didn't cast the Jerusalem vote. She's having a friends party.
Right.
Did you get invited?
No, I didn't, because I did not abstain. I wasn't one of the 35 countries that abstained. I was one of the 21 countries that did not cast a vote, one of the 8 countries that voted with us in the last vote at the UN to allow us, believe it or not, for us to move the capital, our embassy, to the capital of Israel. It turns out Israel wants that. It turns out Congress for the last 30 years demanded that. So we actually did that. That's where all the ATMs are. That's where the Knesset is. That's where the Supreme Court is. It seems logical. But I love the stand she took. I love the attitude she had. She has class. Her presentation was strong. It was direct. She adapted the president's voice in doing it with their own style. And she's trying to say, listen, you can do what you want, and I'm not going to necessarily take the money away, and the money is staggering what we give in, but I'm going to tell you right now, you ask for things. You're probably not going to get them the next time you ask for things. I think that America needs to let everybody know we're not looking to be your friend. We're looking to be respected. That was the message when President Trump won. That's the message the world's getting now.
And then they all come together today, and as David Lee Miller says, that they basically vote unanimously to say that North Korea should not be a nuclear power.
And they shouldn't. 15-0, it shows that she still has street cred.
Right.
It shows that everybody who's saying, wow, America blew it. If you don't take the money away, we look like we're making empty promises. It's an empty bag. It doesn't really matter. So when we need it, we realize the world realizes this is an outrageous regime that's pushed us to the edge. I think she's getting a lot of respect. My goodness, I don't remember the last time we talked so much about an ambassador
to the United Nations.
To the UN. It's been forever.
Indeed. Take a look at this. Vice President Pence had a secret trip yesterday. He went to Afghanistan to see the troops, no doubt. They were just overjoyed to see him because, they're doing a lot of hard work for us. Take a listen to what he said.
Before I left the Oval Office yesterday, I asked the president if he had a message for our troops here in Afghanistan. And he looked at me without hesitation from behind the Resolute desk and he said, "Tell him I love him. On behalf of your commander-in-chief and all of the American people, to pay a debt of honor and respect and gratitude to each and every one of you for your service and your sacrifice." Give yourselves a round of applause.
Brian, it's been many years since we've had troops in Afghanistan, and we're likely to be there for a lot longer. This is a very hard problem to solve.
He met with Abdullah Abdullah, the second most important person in Afghanistan, executive-wise, and Ghani, and he let him know that things have changed. And I understand Afghanistan's the leadership is happy because one thing, we added some troops, but we also changed their mission. We're letting them leave their base. It's going to put our guys and women in more danger, but we actually have to push things forward because currently holding our own, staying back, training others is not working. So it's the way we're attacking, I think, is good. And the progress made is simple. We have forced ISIS out, so that helps.
Well, and changing the rules of engagement there was also super important.
Yep.
And also not signaling that we're going to leave. I think, it's a hard thing to be the president that has to say that we're not going to say exactly when we're leaving, but you have my support, and I think that they were probably appreciative of that message.
He was supposed to go to Egypt, and then he was going to go to Israel. It looks like he said, I want to stick around for the vote. I think there was another reason, but I'll meet you in Afghanistan and come home.
I think he won the prize then, because who wouldn't want to be with the troops?
Absolutely.
That'd be my preference.
By the way, he did the best Bush 43 I've seen in quite some time, really since Will Ferrell.
He was
when
really channeling
forward,
him. No,
and he said, tell him we love him.
I love him. Right.
Yeah.
I know. I saw that too. All right, Brian Kilmeade, thank you so much, and Merry Christmas to you. Be sure to catch Brian's special, Andrew Jackson, Hero Under Fire. It airs this Sunday night at 9 p.m. Eastern and again at midnight here on the Fox News channel. You won't want to miss it. So what's expected to be a record-breaking travel season getting into full swing today. More than 100 million Americans reportedly hitting the roads, rails, and skies, heading to their holiday destinations. And that high volume, coupled with a storm system moving across several states, setting up what could be some slow travel. Adam Housley is live in Inglewood, California, next to the country's busiest interstate. Adam, how's it looking this afternoon? Doesn't look bad to me.
This is like the only time you'll ever see the 405 during the day on any day.